So, welcoming to the podcast is cinema programmer, filmmaker, and writer Chris O'Neill. How you doing, man?
Hi, and thanks for having me. This should be fun.
We appreciate you taking the time. You're just we're both kind of. It's the morning time. You're coming from over in Ireland. Is that right?
Yep. So it's a couple of hours later than you guys, but still morning time. But yeah, so it's a rare day where there's sunshine in Ireland, which doesn't
Oh,
often happen. Usually lots of rain.
oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. So you know, I've been told that um, there is a lot of rain there, and kind of similar to our Seattle scene over
Yeah.
here, and but do you still is it still nice and green over there? It has to be nice and green when it's the better months, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's one thing we do have is lots of green. The
Yeah,
skies might be grey, but we have lots of green on the ground.
that's good. That's good. But we appreciate you coming to talk to us today. And as usual, we we're going to get into every as much as we can. Um, you're a cinema programmer, which is I think one of the coolest jobs I think there can be. And of course, you're also a person that's delved into filmmaking and some really interesting stuff. You sent us our three of your shorts, and they're all very experimental things. So, but let's start in kind of into your love of film. Like where did that whole um, beginnings for you start? Because we hear all different places people start with film.
Yeah, sure. I listen to your show. I've heard a few people, when they're asked the same question. Um, Me being 41, I was very much of the video store generation, and I think what's interesting about the video store was even as a kid, you might go in to rent a kid's movie, but you're seeing walls and shelves of artwork for movies that you are curious about or might be ingrained into your mind. I mean, I was actually thinking about this earlier. Our local video store, I grew up in the UK for about 10 years before I moved to Ireland. I'm Brit Irish. And the one we used to go to most was called the Video Vault. And it had this big wall, a particular one. And I always remember seeing on it uh, Mad Max, Death Race 2000, Trancers, and Soldier Blue. And they were just random ones, and because every week we'd go in, they'd still be there, like they'd be on the shelf, and that sparked my interest. And also with the video store, you would rent a movie that to you was the same as renting the latest big release, but in fact it was incredibly obscure. Nobody else knew about it, but to you, being of a young age, it's all the same. So, for example, one of my favorite movies when I was like, a kid was Buckaroo Banzai, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai, and nobody else in school had seen it, that kind of thing. Or the Eliminators, the Empire Pictures movie. I used to love those movies, and so those trips, weekly trips to the video store, I think was a big starting point for me. And also, I must admit, my parents were I was very lucky with my parents that if anything was rated 15s, like sorry, in UK and Ireland, we have like that much like the rating system in the US, but we
Yeah.
have like the 18 rating to be the highest, and 15s, age 15s. And they used to let me rent anything that was about 15s rated. Anything 18s, like sometimes I was able to watch, but with them. But anything was 15. So I saw lots of stuff, you know. Probably sometimes inappropriate, I don't know, but as I said, it was just this kind of a fascination with whatever you pick off the shelf, whether it's a big movie or a small movie. For the time period you're watching it, it's the same thing. And I think that's really where it started.
Yeah, I think when you're well, first of all, I think it's what's interesting about a lot of people's early watching habits is a lot of it is based on artwork. And I think it's one of the more unappreciated things when it comes to boutique labels as well, is that we love all the really amazing artwork that gets done, but we don't think too much about who does it. And we try to bring on the show. We got a good one coming up soon with Tony Stella, but that Andrew's already spoiled, so I'll go ahead and spoil it. but he, it's I hear this a lot. We've heard this a few times with a few different people, that it's just looking at that row of artwork that really can be just the entryway into something that you might have never have heard of. And I think it's also really interesting as well that the video store is a curator, because it's and then at the time, there's not nearly as much output being done. The way streaming is now, where there's so much being put out, but you don't even see it. You don't even know that it's there. It just keeps filling up these streaming services. And when you go in the video store, it's all there laid out for you, and you can kind of get your eyes on anything you want, and just pick. And because we're kids, or because of whatever, because the marketing machine isn't as crazy as it is now, you have so much better chance to stumble upon something interesting. And nowadays it's not so easy. I think you're always guided in some way
Mm.
towards something, and not
Mhm.
not able to just accidentally discover something.
Well, it's
Yeah.
the algorithm is what does that.
Yeah.
Computers and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff kind of takes information that you give it, or probably information you don't even know you're giving it, and it makes the decisions for you. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Whereas, just kind of it takes away all that exploration, all that, you know, finding the hidden gems or finding random things, kind of like Chris was saying, and just like you end up watching things that other people that are around you don't, have never heard of or haven't seen yet. Whereas now it feels like everyone seems to talk about the same things. Well, whatever's hot at the moment, you know what I mean? Whatever's in the zeitgeist, because everybody has access to it at the exact same time, in the exact same place. So, and you can talk about it on just massive places, social media forums, and all that kind of stuff. Whereas you were saying, Chris, like back in the day, talking to your friends at school about random things, it's just not a lot of randomness now. It's all kind of like focused, and we don't even realize it.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. And like I remember as a kid, if my parents or whatever circumstance I was with, where I was somewhere else in another town or another city or whatever, and you had time to kill, you'd find the nearest video store and just pop in, and usually rental stores, so you couldn't take anything away, but it was just the fun of going into each one and each one having different things. Obviously, the new release shelves would be probably relatively the same, but when you go to see everything else, they'd all have their own quirks and their own oddities, and because the horror section or the comedy section or the thriller section, etc., would be a random selection of library titles. They could be small and big and relatively new and older and things like that. So yeah, so I think the video store had a big influence on a lot of people in terms of their initial interest in movies. I know it certainly was for me, and as I've said, and yeah, as you were saying, now with streaming, the algorithm, and it's like, well, this is what we think you would like to see, or this is what we want you to see. Like if you actually do a search on a lot of these streaming sites of specific titles, you find sometimes you stumble across stuff by accident that you wouldn't find if you're waiting for it to be offered to you.
yeah. It's a yeah. It's kind of a mess for me. I love just I think finding the more in-depth ways of figuring out what I like, because I mean, and I think a lot of us, especially as collectors, we do this. I think some of the best ways to find what you like is to just start with maybe filmmakers that you like, going
Mm,
going down them rabbit holes, starting with, for instance, of course, I think a lot of us loved Spielberg. So, at the time, Spielberg's got Jaws coming out, back in the 80s, your Close Encounters, your Indiana Jones. And so now you're like, well, let me, of course there was no internet then, but now you go
mm,
back and if you're, maybe reading a magazine or something, you go back and that Spielberg did Duel, he did, some interesting early work. And so it's, I think a more, you know, looking at the artists and looking at what the artists did, and the people involved, is a better way than letting the computer decide for you. And sometimes, they can give you something interesting, but it is limited. It is limited to what is probably stuff that other people have already looked at instead
Right.
of really finding something super obscure. But I think, you know, this love of cinema, this thing, obviously it plays into what you eventually would do as an artist yourself. And we took a look at your short films, and I know Andrew
Mm,
is fascinated by this
I
because
am.
he's big into surrealism. He loves that stuff. He's a Lynch fan, and your short films are all very experimental and surreal.
Yeah, I
And
was I was gonna ask about that specifically just because I saw certain influences. So I was going to ask you, what were your influences earlier on in your life that then impacted you when it came to your filmmaking?
Well, I think one of the earliest influences that I still have now, and if I was ever pushed to say who's your most influential filmmaker, I'd have to say Nicholas Roeg.
yeah,
Um, because I mean, when I was in my early teens, seeing films like Performance, Bad Timing, Don't Look Now, The Man Who Fell to Earth, the non-linear storytelling and the incredible world building of those films, and every time you see them there's something different to them. I mean, I've seen Bad Timing I don't know how many times. I mean, I've lost count, but every time I see it there's always another small detail that I never noticed before, or an opinion on something I didn't have before, or an opinion changes. And likewise Performance. So I think in a lot of ways, Nicholas Roeg, it's his fault. you know, and it was really wonderful for me. I used to program for the Cork Film Festival here in Ireland, and one year I got to do a mini retrospective of like 4 or 5 films of Roeg's, and we got to go to London to meet him to do a little filmed intro, and just sitting in his study, like I basically just sat back and let the interviewer ask the questions because I was more interested in just soaking in, like we're in his study. I was
yeah,
looking at the photographs that he has, and what was fascinating was, for example, was most of the photographs in his study would be photos of family photos, like christenings, weddings, this kind of thing. But the one filmmaking photo he had was a photo of him and Donald Cammell on the set of Performance, the two of them sitting together. And it was a not a huge photo, but it was reasonably sized as well, and the way it was placed and everything. So, uh, you know, to like Performance still influences a lot of people, but I think even Rogue was influenced a lot by what Donald Cammell was doing on that movie. So uh, yeah, if I had to just state like one particular filmmaker, I'd have to say him. But in terms of like other influences, I pick up weird details and and slot them in. I mean, there was one film I made where the fun of it for me was uh, I wanted it all to be post dubbed. I wanted
mm,
all the sound to be done in post, and that was purely because of my fascination and love of watching Italian movies that were dubbed into English or whatever. And that strange hollow kind of sound that you get where it's not location sound, even if it's
yeah,
the actor's real voices being used. And I found that fascinating. So that's an influence. Or I mean, a lot of my films are found footage where I use previously existing footage and I do something else with them. So, for instance, one of my films, Bogna Korvich, uses footage from a film with Christina Rains, who was a great actress in the 70s and into the 80s. But the idea was she was a supporting character in this particular movie that I used footage from, which was Russian Roulette, 1975. But I made an experimental movie where I just used footage of her. So all the other story, all the other characters were removed, and it was just about her. And I've done that a few times as well. So Yeah, so when I was watching that movie, for example, Russian Roulette, I was focusing on her, so her performance would be an influence, and
Yeah.
but a physicality, a body language, screen presence, rather than using the dialogue of the scenes she was used, in. So sorry, that sounds maybe a bit of a vague answer. After the
No.
Rogue One was quite specific, and after that, but and tomorrow, if you ask me, I might think of another thing, and another thing. But yeah, so it all goes in somewhere and comes out another way. you know.
Well, I was gonna say the way I look at experimental filmmaking, it can almost be narrowed down like it's a way of stripping down filmmaking to almost it's like very rudimentary, kind of levels, like where it's like looking at a painting or like still photography, where it's very much tuning in on a particular feeling, or it's trying to invoke something in particular, and it's trying things that might not seem so obvious, but the more you watch it, the more maybe a feeling happens. Because that's what happened when I was watching some of yours, was that you don't necessarily understand what's trying to be said here, or if they're what the purpose of the filmmaker is trying to focus on. But you start, if you the more you kind of like just like let it come over you, you start to kind of feel something when especially like the one film that you did called Dreams Can't Hurt You, um, where it's kind of it's taking footage, previous use footage, and it's like reuse. It's like starting the scene and then reversing the scene, and then going back, showing like things and from different and holding on things and repeating things, and it's like the more it does it, the more you start to feel a little bit uncomfortable, and it's not like a thing of like, oh, I'm bored by this movie or something. Like it's like you start to tune in on what's being repeated, and you're listening for subtle differences or listening for subtleties, and it's like, yeah, this is really interesting. Yeah, I mean, explain kind of. Does that feel right? Am I speaking right here?
Oh, absolutely. And with experimental cinema, um, experimental cinema is interesting because when you're watching it, as you just said, you don't necessarily know where the filmmaker, the artist, is coming from. You're just going on your gut response to what you're looking at or listening to, or both. And that might be a very different interpretation to someone else or another person, or even what the filmmaker had. And sometimes with some experimental films, I know with some of mine, I'm sure if people are watching them, they might kind of tune out
Yeah,
and not necessarily be focusing. I mean, that doesn't sound good when you're talking about filmmaking, but for something to be, not 100% engaged. But I find sometimes your mind can wander, and it's almost like a meditative experience sometimes, and it can bring up other feelings, other emotions, other thoughts, other ideas that you might have to create something or whatever. So I think that's really true. With Dreams Can't Hurt You, that was using footage from a trailer, a horror movie trailer. So I was playing with the expectations of how the scene was going to play out. I mean, it's literally like probably 20 seconds
yeah,
manipulated and played reversed and everything for about 2 or 3 minutes. Um, Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes I think it's quite funny. Sometimes I always, when I'm watching it with an audience, I saw it once last year with an audience, and there's a moment in it where I just go, if I kept repeating it from this point onwards, I think I'd lose everyone. As in, they'd start getting, annoyed with it, and then suddenly I'll go, oh yeah, and then it changes. It does something a bit different. So I'm into like repetition, but repetition where it slightly varies each time. So it's kind of keeping you on your toes a little bit.
yeah,
So yeah, but no, experimental cinema is an interesting thing. It's also something that I think if people think they don't understand it, it makes them feel like it's not for them, or it's maybe elitist or something. Like they should be understanding it and they don't. But I certainly don't get that. I don't get that at all from watching experimental cinema, and I don't think people should have that while watching it. You know, I mean, you might not like it, you might love it, but whether you understand it or know the context to where it's coming from shouldn't necessarily matter. I think with a lot of the examples of experimental cinema, anyway.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, for me, out of the couple of short films that we got to see from you, I Wake Up Screaming was fascinating to me. It's just it felt so unhinged yet engrossing at the same time. If that's a way to put it, because it's a haunting. If I read it correctly, wasn't it like kind of taking clips from certain 70s genre horror films and piecing them together, or was it from one film specifically?
It was what from one film. It was from the Oliver Stone film Seizure
Hmm.
from 1974, and the obscure kind of it's weird because when you're watching that particular piece, and I'm glad you liked it, by the way. Thank you. Um, is well, first of all, I think the soundtrack that my friend Gabby Bam Bam did was incredible, and I think that adds a hell of a lot to the experience. But that film was I used a VHS transfer of it. Didn't want to make it easy for myself. I couldn't just rip a Blu-ray or something. I wanted to make the
No.
and I refilmed the VHS off a screen to give it that kind of look, and then pumped up the colors and things like
Oh
that.
yeah.
But in my mind, the obscure kind of detail I was coming from was that film was about a writer with a family, and suddenly and his friends visit at this house and then suddenly his some of the visions and nightmares that he's been creating in his head are actually coming to life and attacking and the people in the household, and the obscure detail in that was that for me made it some inkling of siblings that were that it was personal, was that it was about a writer with a family, and there's just certain emotional moments in that where uh positive or negative, how the family members respond to each other. It kind of it kind of hit me quite hard when I saw it, because I guess I was a year or two. I guess my son was a year or two old at the time. So there's an obscure little detail there which you wouldn't get that detail from watching the film, but that's what was the germ of the idea for me to work with that.
Yeah, it came across in that way. For me, immediately when I saw it right away, I thought of the Canadian filmmaker Guy Madden, because his films are similarly done in that style of re-editing footage, um, in a certain way to kind of get certain things across. Coincidentally, and I didn't plan this out at all, I think the night before, I had just watched his film The Green Fog from 2017. And for those of you listening don't know what that film is it was co-directed by Guy Madden, Evan Johnson, Galen Johnson, and the movie's only about an hour long, and it is a re-edit tribute homage to Hitchcock's Vertigo, where he takes clips from several different films, like many films, and cuts and takes footage from each of them, and in a way reenacts the whole plot of Vertigo with these clips. And it's fascinating the way he did it, but it had that same kind of haunting, immersive score as your film did, and it just reminded me of that so much. And I was just like, it just coincided that I had seen that film right before I had seen yours. So I was, I guess, in that surreal, mode of just like, let me immerse myself in something that I know I will not understand, or it will not make a lot of sense plot wise, but it's the energy, it's the feeling, it's all of those things. I think you really have to give yourself over to surreal cinema and avant-garde cinema and just go for the ride, even if you don't know what's going on, which is it's frightening for a lot of people to do that with movies. People want to be engaged, people want to follow plots, A, B, C, all the way to Z, but it sometimes that's not the case, and that's kind of what I loved about cinema, 'cause it was surreal cinema always keeps you guessing, and you never know what's gonna happen next, and I thought with your films, that was definitely the case. Um, and even with your more recent one, was probably the most experimental out of the ones we got to watch. Steven, would you say so?
Oh yeah, yeah. I was gonna say your last one, from the Tunnel of Faded Memories.
Great title.
Yeah, yeah, I love the title, and it just sits on a female character who's just in different settings and in different poses, and you just you 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 spend you spend. I think that the film's about, was it about
12 to 14 minutes?
yeah, yeah,
Something like
in
that?
that area, and you just get different images of her just kind of sitting there and looking off into the distance, and I think what's very, really good, what I really like about something like this is that, like I was saying earlier, you're looking at something and you get your own impressions of it, and you start to wonder what she's thinking, or what she's looking at, or what what she has just went through, and you start to fill in gaps with your own imagination.
Mm,
And I think that that's one of the best things about cinema is and I think it's something that gets lost a little bit with modern filmmaking, is that we spend a lot of time over explaining things.
yeah.
And
Lot
I
of
think,
exposition.
yeah,
They feel like they have to lead the audience by the hand down a certain path to get to a certain conclusion because they don't trust audiences to get there by themselves. And
yeah.
in their defense, that oftentimes a lot of audiences don't. They go
Sure,
off
sure.
all willy nilly.
But but
Um,
but there
yeah.
but I think experimental film, especially one like this film, I think is a great way of, it's an exercise in trying to do more subtle filmmaking, where you really are using the camera to invoke emotion. And I think
Mm.
that that's what I really love about that film. So tell us more about what went into that.
Well, thank you. And by the way, just to go back, the Green Sea, or sorry, the Green Fog, wonderful movie. And yeah, I endorse anyone. You should see that movie. It's wonderful. The one that was co-directed by Guy Madden. But in regards to the most recent film I made, yeah, well, what was interesting about it is it's footage that was shot 20 years ago. Um, that at the time, what was happening was I was prepping to shoot a narrative short film, um, and it never got made. But the actress I was going to use in the film, who wasn't actually like an actor, she was just someone I had met and thought had great screen presence, and I wanted to see if she had screen presence. So we just for an hour or two went to a friend's house, and I just filmed her not doing anything, just hanging out. And yet, I think in doing that, you can hopefully sense that screen presence that I sense from her, where you're intrigued by her. You don't know, you're wondering what she's thinking. You're wondering what's going on in her head, and it plays out in that weird way with, again, with the kind of video look, the slow motion, and uh, again, that's one of those possibly immersive films where maybe you would tune out and start thinking of something else, but it's put you in a certain wavelength to do that. And it's because that's one thing that's really important about experimental cinema, is it puts you in a wavelength, and if you respond to it, it's wonderful. If you don't, you don't. And hopefully that film will do that. So yeah, thank you for watching it. That hasn't been shown publicly or anything yet. That's a really new one. So it was only just finished the end of last year. So you're one of the first. You
Ooh.
are
Nice.
one of the first people to see it.
Exclusive. We're part of the cool club, I guess. Um, it also reminded me of kind of almost a dreamlike quality. You know what I mean? Or even like a memory, which memories can turn into dreams or vice versa. As time goes on, our memories kind of become dreamlike. And, it was very interesting of you to not. I don't know if there was any audio ever with the footage at all. Now that you're saying it's footage from 20 years ago, maybe there was no audio with it at all, because if anything, that made it even more intriguing and more dreamlike, because oftentimes when you have dreams that are kind of like memories, sometimes there's no sound in them. At least that's happened to me. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's just an image or clips of an image or someone that you knew when you were younger. Maybe it's a family member that's passed away, a friend that's passed away, and all you do is see them like walking somewhere, or you see them looking at you from a distance, or whatever that case may be. And it just reminded me a lot of that. I don't know if that was an intentional, to make it feel, give that extra surreal quality of a dream.
By the way, you guys are so much better articulate. Sorry, I'm not even saying that right. You guys articulate these experimental film discussion topics much better than I can, I think. I'm like, yeah, that's good. I must say that the next time somebody asks me some of these
Oh,
things.
you can use it. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
please.
Yeah. No, I mean, I just for example, I just noticed the last 3 films that I made that I've shared with you guys, for example, one of them has wake in the title, one has dreams in the title, one has memory in the title. So it's a subconscious thing, believe it or not, even though it seems obvious with the titles. But I do think that cinema that transcends you outside of normality is fun, and it doesn't even have to be experimental cinema. I mean, how many times do you go to a movie theater and just get lost in the world or something, and it's that wonderful kind of sense of world building, and you being introduced to a household, a city, a landscape, a set of characters, the way it looks with the colors and I mean, for example, I love nocturnal movies. I love movies that are set all at nighttime, and some of those can be really obviously creepy, but also there's something can be sexy or cool or something just really beautiful about them as well. I mean, one of my favorite, Dusk to Dawn movies would be like Assault from Precinct 13,
Mm.
And when you're watching it, when you actually start realizing, I love it when you're watching a movie like that, and when the lights go off initially, you see it goes black, but then it's watching the subtlety of it slightly brightening up. So it's still dark and nighttime, but there's no light in there, yet you can still see what's happening in the setting. But it's like the way it's like as if it's moonlight or something like that coming in. And, I think experimental cinema or all cinema should be about the idea of people being immersed in something, I think. And hope for, and yeah, you're right. There was some just location sound, or sometimes it was me talking, like move your hand, look over there. So, just things like that. But I mean, there is actually a very subtle buzz on that soundtrack, and
I was going to say, there's a room
Mm.
tone, or something that is there, but it's very subtle. Yeah.
Do you know what it is? It's the sound of a mini DV camera running.
Oh, okay. I
Because
like that.
I refilmed the footage off using a mini DV camera, and that was the sound of the buzz, and that was purely by accident because I was filming with the camera,
Yeah.
and hearing that buzz, and I thought that sounds pretty good. So then I set it up again just to get that sound, because unfortunately, the best will in the world, even if you have a theater space or let alone at home, you can never get 100% silence. There's always some,
No, there's always
Very
some.
true.
yeah. So I thought even if there's just a bit of a hum of some kind,
Yeah.
that would take out any other noises that if they're subtle or whatever. But yeah, no. But thank you. I'm glad you guys got something out of it.
Yeah, yeah, and like what you're saying about immersion, I think there's a little bit of a, I think sometimes there's a little bit of an overcompensation when it comes to how immersion is in cinema nowadays, where they tend to want to build worlds out and show you as much as possible in a world, and they think that that's going to immerse you in the world. But really, I think the more you allow the audience to use their brain to come up with the ideas about the world and fill in the blanks, that's what's going to immerse you more, is that you're actually using your brain to fill in the blanks. Because when you're letting the film show you all the things that you think you want to see, then it kind of takes your brain away from it. I think if you really want to be lost in a movie, the film that you're watching will show you just enough to spark your imagination. And that's, I think, what immersion is. That's what really immerses me is these worlds being set up and then allowing me to use my imagination. And that's to me good filmmaking. And I think that that's what something like this experimental filmmaking can really do for you. It can really create an exercise for you to use your imagination.
Hmm.
Um,
That's a good transition, Stephen, or a good setup for a transition to
you know,
talk
you don't
about.
have to say good transition
Okay,
when there's
I
a good
was giving you a
transition.
compliment. I guess I won't do that ever
You don't
again.
have to do that. Just switch over.
I was just gonna ask Chris about being a cinema programmer. Speaking of immersion, you know, the cinematic experience uh, can be very immersive, as Stephen kind of just described. How did that kind of come about? You know, becoming a cinema programmer.
Oh, purely by accident.
Dang it!
No,
I want to have one of them accidents.
Yeah, I know. Seriously.
well, it's an interesting one because ever since I was young, I wanted to be involved in film, but it was always to be a filmmaker. And I mean, I worked out the other day. I've been a cinema programmer more or less. I mean, there was the odd time between jobs and things, but I've been a cinema programmer like 19 years now. And I started quite young in my early 20s. And what happened was I was working in this wonderful, much missed now art house cinema in Cork called the Kino. And I started as an usher, then I became a projectionist, and then the manager left. And I just said to the owners, well, look, until you get a new manager, do you want me to help out for a couple of weeks? And they said, yeah, okay. And even with programming, what happened was they said, well, you've been working here a while now, you know what works. So every week, what I do was, every week, what I would do was make my list of what we were going to show, send it to the owners. And over the course of 5 years, there was only one or two times where they ever said, oh, maybe change this or maybe put this in instead. But otherwise, they were like, yeah, go for it. So, and that was back in the 35 millimeter days as well. So we get the print on a Friday morning or an afternoon down from Dublin on a train, as it was then. Used to have a train service for courier drop-offs, and getting it in a car, rushing it to the venue, getting it made up, and getting it on that evening. So it that that it was purely accidental, because then after a couple of weeks, like when I said I was going to just help out, they were like, well, if you're happy, do you want to just keep doing this? And I did. So uh and generally speaking, there was always one or two films you got absolutely wrong, like you thought this would do well and it did absolutely nothing, and it was just like, oh god. And if you have a one screen cinema and no one's going to that one film, you
Yeah.
feel it a lot more than if it's a multiplex. But most of the time, looking back on what we were programming and what was available as well and what was on release, I think I had a knack for it, and I hope I still do. Um, Obviously, these days with digital, it's a bit different. You don't have to wait for a print to be finished elsewhere. A digital print can be shared and be sent to you via download now. Uh, but yeah, so it was just sheer luck and enthusiasm, I think, is what got me into this.
Yeah, and the place where you're programming at, the Trickle. Tell us a little bit about that place, because I was looking at images of it, and it's a fascinating building there that you guys do. You not only shows films in, but you do music stuff in there as well. And so tell us a little bit about that place.
Yeah, it's so Triskel Arts Centre. When I first moved to Cork, it was just this little building next to an old church, and in that smaller art center building, they used to hold screenings, and I remember seeing some amazing films there on film. Like I saw Thundercrack, Trouble Every Day, Videodrome. I just saw some amazing films there, and uh, that program was wonderful, and they closed for several years, and to rebuild the art center to join onto this church building behind it, former church space, which opened in 2010. So it's, goodness, yeah, almost 13 years now, and it's a former church, as I said, with the pews in it still, you know,
Them
uh, up,
uncomfortable pews.
upholstered, thankfully.
Oh, thank
Okay.
goodness.
Yeah, upholstered, thank goodness. And so, yeah, it's a former, as I said, church auditorium space, but it's been reconfigured as a music venue slash cinema. And yeah, I mean, we try to do like the best foreign language, world, independent, national cinema. We try to do retro cinema, all kinds of stuff, and that space can be really special to experience certain films in. I mean, we showed Nosferatu last year for its
Mm.
100th anniversary, and also Vampire as well, and those silent, black and white movies going back to, like I said, one's 100 years old. It really made it something special seeing in that space,
Yeah.
because when you're watching it, depends whereabouts you're sitting, of course, but you can actually see sometimes, depending on the imagery, you can either just be focusing on the screen, but if you actually uh, start to notice, you can sometimes see some of the reflection on the panels of the wood
Mm.
around the space. And we showed Suspiria once, and when Suspiria does that really crazy reds and blues and
Yeah.
different colors, it was almost like reflecting back onto the audience. It's just really intense. So yeah, I mean, we're just pulling out of we're still in post-COVID pandemic kind of recovery in terms of trying to get our audiences back at this point. But it's a great space, and I'm happy to. I'm very lucky to be able to be programming it.
Yeah, I just love the idea of that there's a church of cinema somewhere. That, that you go in, it's like church, and that's how I feel all the time. Coming down to my layer here is my shrine, my religion is all around me. Um, but so of course, a lot of what we know you from is your work on these boutique labels, taking it to physical media. Please tell us, are you a collector yourself? Do you have I know we don't see it behind you, but do you have a little shelf somewhere where there's some physical media releases?
Well, you can't see it, but this entire shelf here
Okay, I
is a
see it. Yeah.
is a portion of my collection. A lot of it's in boxes in an attic, unfortunately for
Yeah.
space. This is like my makeshift office, and the other side is books and VHS, and goodness knows what else, hard drives, and old old film cans as well.
Yeah, it's cool.
So yeah, so it sounds more impressive than it is. It just looks like a mess. But no, I am a collector, and I've been doing these video essays now for just over 2.5 years, and I am currently working on my 36th video essay that I've done that's been on a physical media release. So yeah, it what happened was, it was one of your previous guests, Jonathan from Fun City Editions.
Yeah.
It was him who contacted me to ask would I be interested in doing a video essay for what was their very first release, Alphabet City. And what was nice about that experience was it was purely from me being a filmmaker and from conversations that me and Jonathan had online, because obviously he's in the States. I've never met him in person because due to him being in the States and me being here. But just from my social media posts and things, he was like, oh, I think this is something you would you'd be able to do. Would you be interested? And I went, yeah. Like, it just never occurred to me before. And that was my very first one, Alphabet City. And yeah, I've just been working on them since. So But yeah,
you stumbled into this as well, I guess. Yeah.
well, the weird
Heck
thing
yeah.
is, I really wanted to do filmmaking. That was what I was trying to do, and instead, my two things I've kind of been best known for or have job work with has been cinema programming and making these video essays. And I'm not complaining, but it's just like when you try one thing and then something else comes along, sometimes it's the unexpected thing that works out better and for the better, you know.
Yeah, and hopefully, maybe even inspires you or helps keep you motivated to keep doing filmmaking as well. Because
Mm.
I think I think we can get obsessed with the thing that we want to do sometimes, but sometimes um, you gotta kind of take a step back from it and not make it your only focus. And it can, and you're still talking about film. You're still looking at films and looking at them in an analytical way, and it helps, like I said, helps inspire some of your own filmmaking.
Yeah, I mean, some of the techniques, I mean, for example, the the most recent film that you mentioned already, uh, the Down the Tunnel of Faded Memory, uh, that one, the slow motion effect of that was inspired by what I'd done with the Blue Steel video essay for the imprint release of that movie. So some of the experimental aspects of my most recent film came from one of my actual essay films, you know. So yeah, that was an interesting kind of overlap. And also, I think by editing and cutting and doing different things with sound and voiceover and sometimes text on the screen with the video essays, it does give you ideas and inspire you to do other work, I think, you know.
Yeah, I think especially and I know, Andrew, you just watched it, the Blue
Mm.
Steel video
I did.
essay. That because that film itself has got a lot of interesting ideas to jump into. I think that's a
Yeah.
film that I realized listening to your essay and also the other features on there, that there's a lot more going on in that film that I realized. And yeah, talk about that, Andrew.
No, I was just gonna ask him what his process was when it comes to creating the video essays, because I don't really know how it's done. Do you write out like a whole script that kind of breaking the whole movie down, or are there just certain ideas that you go with? How is that whole process go from like something I'm assuming fairly large to something that's 12 minutes long, as the one from Blue Steel is?
You know what? The process varies each time, and it's often based on the film that I'm doing a video essay about. So, for example, um, my longest video essay was 33 minutes long, and that was on the Vinegar Syndrome release of Censor, the recent British horror film. And that was my video essay was a historical look at the real video nasties hysteria in Britain. So that is a subject that I'm very well aware of, and in fact, I had even been planning to do a feature length video essay about violence in cinema, specifically from sort of the late 70s when things just go a bit nuts. I mean, I'm thinking of the stuff that was coming out of Italy, the stuff that was coming out of America at the time, around that 1979, 1980 area where, you got Cannibal Holocaust coming out. And even like, are either of you familiar with a not very good murder mystery from 1979 with Audrey Hepburn called Bloodline? Have you heard of it? I think it's
I've heard
based,
of
I've
it.
heard of it,
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
it's based on a Sidney Sheldon novel. But like I said, it's not very good, but it's old school cast. Like you got Ben Gazzara, Audrey Hepburn, you have James Mason, and it's all about like a murder mystery, and it's all corporate, high class business world and everything. But somewhere in it, there's a subplot about prostitutes being murdered and it being filmed for snuff movies.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's what I mean. So it's like trying to push in this nasty seedy element into something else, or even when you see something like The Passage, that crazy film with Malcolm McDowell. Have you seen that?
Mm.
Oh, okay. So it's like an old school, like Guns and Never Own story, like adventure World War II story. But then you also have Malcolm McDowell as this psychotic Nazi, and he plays it like he plays the character he plays in Caligula.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's like even James Mason's in that as well. And he apparently said to McDowell, "You're in a different movie to the rest of us," you know. But my point being is, there's just two examples of relatively straightforward mainstream movies that just had these nasty, seedy details put into them, you know. So anyway, sorry, I'm going on a tangent. The point is,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm hoping to do a fefeature length video essay on that subject around that time period where things just kind of got a bit nuts. I mean, you know, 1979 was also Caligula, you know, that just weird area. But so when I did that video essay for the Video Nasties hysteria subject for the censor disc, that was something I just jumped into, and it took 33 minutes, and it could have been longer even. I just had to pull back and things. But then my very first one was Alphabet City, and that was only 5 minutes. You
yeah,
know, so sometimes it depends on the subject matter. Sometimes it depends on the the detail I'm getting out of the movie, or the thing I want to focus on. You know, like I also did a few video essays on the neo noir set, the After Dark neo noir set, Volume One, and the one I did for One False Move, I think, was almost like 25 minutes. You know, because it was
yeah,
just a movie I'm just a big fan of, and there's just so much to say about that film. You know, but then sometimes it might be a smaller detail that I just want to pull up on and focus on, and that will only take, you know, 8 to 10 minutes. You know.
yeah. Yeah, I watched your you know, I think when you go, especially when you're doing stuff about the filmmakers themselves, that them can always go a little longer. I watched your Burning Paradise feature video essay where you talked a lot about Ringo Lam's career, and that one, them are some of my favorite essays because you really get a great kind of compact overall kind of like look at a filmmaker's career, and it gives you so many ideas of where you might find interest in this person's career. Because you know, just watching that one, I was like, God, I got to go watch this movie now. I got to go watch, you know, the last movie he did with Chow Yun Fat. I'm trying to, I think it's Contact was the name of the movie. I
Oh,
can't
full
full
contact.
full
Yeah,
contact.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's great. It's great. Yeah.
yeah. I was like, I got to check that out, you know. And that he went from this kind of realism to like more stylistic later on in his career. Yeah, I mean, I love stuff like that. So, but yeah, there's definitely an art to it, and it's cool that, you know, once again you kind of stumbled into it, and you've been able to kind of create your own voice of how you do these, because everybody does them differently. And you know, I think one of the main things that's important about a video essay or commentary is that your voice is not, it's not coming off like you're necessarily reading off of a prompt. Like, it's got to come off like you kind of know what you're talking about. I think it's important that a commentary, it's not like it's not robotic. It's got to be
Mhm.
like, it's got to seem intelligence. There's got to seem like there's an intelligence. I think yours do that for me. Uh,
I mean, yeah, not to be, superficial or judgmental in any way. Sometimes people who do narration or things like that, sometimes their voice is probably not the best for narration or anything like that. But
sometimes
yours
yeah,
comes
yeah.
off incredibly smooth, like very smooth, very, tonally fantastic. Does it take a lot of takes to kind of get it right, or is there editing and stuff done?
Well, I have to be honest. I mean, of my 35, 36 essays I've done, there's only a handful where I use my own voice. I
Well,
used
come
to
on, man. You got to use your voice more.
I used to I still do sometimes depending on the subject, but I used to work with, or I do work with, an actor called Claire Loy here in Cork, and she's great. And it was weird. What started was, I felt it tonally was like, this subject matter might, the film, yeah, that was it. It was I Start Counting, was this one of my earliest essays, and I started doing the voiceover for that, and I felt, because of the subject matter being a coming of age story about a young woman, uh, a male voice didn't suit it. not that it was inappropriate or anything, it just didn't suit the subject matter. So I asked somebody else to do that voiceover, and then just after that, sometimes also sometimes it's the sheer exhaustion of doing the script writing, doing the editing. Sometimes it's nice just to be able to give somebody else the script, they give it back to you, and then you can work with it. Because you know I joke about this, but sometimes when you're doing one of these video essays, you can get into something like, you could be like a Michael Cimino or something. you know
Yeah.
you just you know and sometimes just for like a 10-15 minute film or something, or piece, and you're kind of going, what? But you get so intense into the research and to the, like, for example, the Ringo Lam uh essay you just mentioned there. I mean, the amount of clips being used, the different films, sourcing them, then getting the good quality clips, then sometimes having to do conversion, like technical conversions on the frame rate so everything matches, and
Yeah.
all these you know logistical things. That's why sometimes I got somebody else to do the voiceovers, but I'm getting more into it now, and the last few I've done. But in terms of doing takes, yeah, goodness, it depends. Like, I did one yesterday, and when I was playing it back, I could just hear clicks, or me mispronouncing something, or me misreading something at one point, and just having to do these little fixes. you know.
That
So,
that whole thing you just said there is what would keep me from ever doing my own video
yeah.
essays, is that I
Yeah, I
can't
mean, as
pronounce anything right.
well, not only that, but I'm just saying the technical aspect of it, I didn't even think of it until you just mentioned it. All of the editing of the clips, getting the clips, timing, overlaying the audio, just in general, seems like takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and kind of painstaking. Are you like a perfectionist when it comes to that, or do you get to a point where you're just like, I can't keep doing this. I have to move on.
well, I think the more essays I do, the more confident I am with the material. And sorry, it sounds like I'm being big headed, but my skills, as in I know what I'm doing, kind of thing, is what I'm trying to say. So there are certain times now where I might be a little bit more, this is fine now. But the first essays I was doing, the first 10 or 20, I would just get so into, like, literally frame by frame editing, um, uh, really trying, and also even just trying to get the volume levels right for the voiceover to dip, or for the film audio to dip, for the voiceover to go up, this kind of thing could just drive you spare. And I mean, I remember, yeah, the first few, even some of the shortest ones were like these, going down a rabbit hole, trying to fix them up, trying to get things done. And also, what I tend to do now is I'll write a script, and then, to answer your question earlier that I didn't answer, I write a script and then edit the material with the script. Maybe sometimes going back and fixing bits, because I realize with the material some bits don't quite work, or a point that is being um, explained in the voiceover is actually being shown in the clip. So sometimes I can remove some of the audio or re-record or something and let the clip speak for itself, rather than having me explain it while it's happening sometimes, or like just like narrating the action. But uh but when I first started, I literally would do, okay, first paragraph, I'd record the first paragraph and then start editing to the first paragraph. And then I'd
Mm.
see where it would go and see where it would go. And yeah, that used to take a long, long time, a long time, for some of the more simpler ones. But you know what? This is going to sound like a very bizarre analogy, but like, when I'm doing these video essays, like, sometimes I'm thinking, like, how do I do it like a really taut B movie, like Don Siegel would do?
Yeah, no, 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 yeah.
Like, just try to make it really like, it's sometimes like, they're never long because I want them to be long. They're long because I want them to get all the information across. And if they're short because the information has been conveyed and I don't want it to linger too long.
Yeah.
So I try to make them very concise, very tight, and hopefully, you'll get a little idea or perspective on something you haven't had before. And also, to be honest, with video essays, some people like them and some people don't. I mean, uh, last year, one of my essays got reviewed. It was the Rush video essay that's on the After Dark set, and I literally had one person in their review say, "I didn't like this video essay. I don't like video essays. I don't like this one, and I won't be revisiting this ever again." I was like, "Oh, that disheartened." And then a couple of days later, somebody was doing a roundup of their favorite imprint bonus features, etc., from the previous year, and one person highlighted that as their favorite video
Yeah.
essay. So it's tricky, and you just do your best and hope people enjoy them, or get
Yeah.
something out of them. And it's like, and if you make them tight and kind of concise, hopefully they're not much of a hassle to get through either. Hopefully they're short enough to be enjoyable.
I think honestly, the visual essay is my favorite thing when it comes to features, because commentaries, you're literally having to take the time to watch the whole movie. Um, you know, when you're talking about interviews can be nice, but interviews are something that eh, I think that you can honestly take the time to maybe. I'm not trying to say that this is a better alternative, but you can go to YouTube. You can get things that, like, interviews are much easily more accessible in general than just on a Blu-ray. But like a video essay is something that's created to help contextually bring you closer to the movie that you're watching, or or an actor or a filmmaker that is involved in the disc that you have. And so, like, I think that it's a really great way, if done well, to introduce you to a whole lot more. And for instance, you sent us also your upcoming video essay on a new Mondo Macama release coming out, the Witch's Mountain.
Mm.
And it really goes through the actor Patty Shepard and her career, and talking about all the different types of cinema that she was involved in. And of course, the one thing that really got me excited was when you go over the section where she was in the Eloy de la Iglesias film,
Mm.
The Glass Ceiling, which I've not seen, and I really want to watch that film now.
Now it
And
makes you want to see it more.
God, I want to see it so bad now. Not so
That
I'm like,
happens. I'll say that happens oftentimes in a lot of special features, whether it be a visual essay or whether it be a documentary feature or something where they talk about a larger context when it comes to movies or cinema, or a director or an actor in the film, and they just start dropping all of these movie titles, and you're like, oh, I got it. Now I got to see this. Now I got to see that. Now I
you
got to
see
see
a
this.
clip, and you're like, okay, that
Because I
one
can't
clip
help
just got
myself. I
me.
got to see it
Yeah,
all. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
Yeah. Oh, it was like you said there. You wanted like Full Contact on the Ringo Lam video essay, and it's, if I remember correctly, the clip that I use is that one with the gunfight where it's actually like
yes,
the point of view of the bullet. I mean,
yep.
yeah, I mean that 10-15 seconds, it sells the movie pretty well, So, and yeah, the Patty Shepard one was great fun because interesting actress. But what I find fascinating about some of these expats who made films in, like, she she's American, but she was based in Spain, and pretty much everything she made was, if not it was European, so if not Spanish, it was Italian or what have you. And I think the only film that I saw that actually had her own voice was the Crypt of the Living Dead. So when you watch that video essay and you see that very small clip of her like teaching in the classroom, I think that's the only film I came across that actually has her own voice, and it's a very interesting voice. I like it. But then when you're watching all the other films she did, they were all dubbed. So
Yeah.
that's an interesting little kind of detail that I
It's
found.
so, like you said earlier, you used it in your own experimental filmmaking, replacing voices. It changes your perspective on the person a little bit when you hear a different tone, a different, you
Hmm.
know, yeah, all really good stuff. Yeah. But Chris, we appreciate you joining us. Um, I really, all the stuff I've come across of yours, I've really loved. Um, we did briefly mention Blue Steel. I really like the Blue Steel essay as well. And we appreciate you sharing everything about yourself and the work you do. And I'm just always super jealous of people that say they stumble into some of my favorite things that I wish I could do.
Mm,
Oh, trust me,
jealous.
I often have to think back and go, how did they get here?
I
Almost
was
like
gonna
that
say, so
Talking Heads song.
what were you going to do if you didn't stumble into this?
That's what it was always going to be, filmmaking, and yet, because my interest in cinema is so almost exploratorial, uh, I don't think a straightforward narrative filmmaking path would have worked, because that was
Yeah,
originally what I was thinking. I mean, I've done a few narrative films as well and things, but usually they're too ambiguous or too unusual to be fully classed as you know a full stop narrative. But yeah, I pinch myself every day going, wow, I'm doing this and it's great. So thanks for having me on, guys, and chatting. I'm glad that there's interest in what I do, that somebody actually wants to talk to me. um,
well, no, yeah, you got even if we're not able to be there and go to your awesome church cinema, because once again another thing I'm jealous of, um, eh, even though we can't be there, we know that we love that there's somebody out in the world that's able to do this thing and keep pushing all different types of cinema on different eyes. So we appreciate you doing that.
oh, no, thanks. And end of the day, that's what it's about. And sorry, we'll wrap up now, but the one thing about cinema programming is it's two things. It's loving cinema and wanting to introduce people to cinema, but more importantly, really, it's making sure the cinema that you're presenting is what you think people want to see. Now,
Yeah,
sometimes there's a box office aspect to that, but there's also a duty, if you like, of wanting there to be an audience for what you're showing. So sometimes you can show your favorites, sometimes you can show something that's really out there and you want to introduce people to, but more importantly, you want to show stuff that they want to see, you know?
yeah,
And that's a really interesting balance of trying to, and sometimes that's just out of a love of cinema duty, and sometimes that's a box office duty. There's two things going on there. But yeah, it's an interesting job. Sometimes you have like we just recently showed After Sun,
hmm
that film.
the new film. Yeah,
And yeah, and in since 2019, which was our last proper cinema year, it's our most successful kind of film, where we actually had a sellout show the other week, which is great. um, but then other weeks you'll have shows where you barely get into double figures for people coming in, so it's
yeah.
this kind of swings and roundabouts.
I
You just mm,
Yeah, I was gonna say, and I know we almost wrapped up, but I have another question that came to mind. Um, uh, when it comes to the programming, and I don't know how far in advance you guys plan for things, but being that you are a video essayist, have you ever thought about creating some type of contextual thing for a particular maybe group of films that maybe you show, to help, maybe help the audience understand maybe why you're showing certain films?
Like
uh,
curating, I think.
yes. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, well, it has come up, and it's something I want to do. Now, I have shown a few of my video essays with films that we've programmed. So, for example, I actually ended up showing Blue Steel recently.
Yeah,
So I showed my video essay. But I guess one of the things that's kind of strange about it is it seems like something you would want to put on at the start for people to go, here you go,
yeah,
enjoy this, but here's something. But the trouble with video essays is most of them are on a bonus feature where people will watch them afterwards,
yeah,
because a lot of the time they give away plot points, plot spoilers, and things. So I did a few, and they've got on after the film. But the trouble is, very few people stay after the credits.
yeah,
So if I can engineer with enough forethought some video essays, but ones that don't give too much away, then it's something I would like to do. It's very time consuming, but it is something I'd like to do if I can. But I
yeah.
am planning at some point to maybe do some video essays that will be free online to view that aren't on physical media, and maybe they could tie in with screenings I'm doing, you know.
Yeah.
So we'll see, but yeah, we'll see.
That's good. I guess I'm one of the weird ones, but it doesn't bother me a lot of times with spoilers. I get in trouble all the time about it, with people talking about movies and spoiling them, and it doesn't really bother me because I mean, ultimately, you got to experience the movie within its proper time frame, and if you bring up a couple points, it doesn't really bother me that much. So it's fine. But yeah, Chris, thank you once again for joining us and for all that you do. And hopefully we can bring you back, and maybe we can do our own little focus on something maybe that interests you. Maybe.
Yeah,
So,
sure, absolutely. I enjoyed this. I hope it was enjoyable for you guys and beneficial for the viewers, listeners. And yeah, thanks for asking me to be on your show.
of course, man, anytime. So thanks, Chris, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.